I'm Eric Bricker, and I've been a psychotherapist for over 25 years. One thing I can tell you for certain is that no one makes it through life unscathed. At some point, many of us will rely on the trusted counsel of another person to help us navigate difficult times, or to reconcile a troubled past. Whether conventional or unconventional, professional or informal, there are a lot of different forms that helping relationships can take. This podcast is an exploration into what makes these relationships work. Who are the people that help us? How do they help us? What do people need help with? My hope is to uncover as much as I can about this very human phenomenon, and I hope that you'll join me. This is the Good Counsel Podcast. I'm Eric Bricker, and this is the Good Counsel Podcast. Today I am joined by Dr. Erin McNamee, and she is a licensed clinical social worker and founder of the Family Recovery Collective, which I'm very interested to hear about. Erin is involved in a lot of postgraduate therapeutic modalities, probably too many to name, but I know that you are trained in psychodrama, EMDR, I believe internal family systems is on there.
Yep.
So you're a person who is adept at doing a lot of different things, and we'll hear about some of that today. So thank you for joining me. It's great to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
All right, great. So I wanted to ask you about the Family Recovery Collective. That is a pretty unique offering in terms of service delivery in psychotherapy and behavioral health. I really like when people are doing unique things. I think with the advent of the internet and social media and these different platforms, it really gives us an opportunity to offer services and modernize the delivery of services to people. And what you guys have created is something like an educational but hybrid social media platform for subscribers to become informed and interact around family addiction. So you're really supporting the family members of people with substance use disorders.
Absolutely. We're centering the family and friend experience. You know, there are so many things out there that obviously support the person with the addiction. And the family is typically an offshoot of that. You know, whether it's a treatment center or a certain program, that's what you'll find, or that's what I've found, is that the family is kind of the secondary thing. And some of the treatment that's helps families or gets families involved, some of it's incredible and great and really thorough, and you can spend a lot of time in it. And some is just kind of we're checking a box, like we made a family call this week, you know, and that's what it is. And I think that, you know, in my professional life and certainly my personal life, I've really realized how important it is to really support family and friends who are walking through this journey.
So what was the main inspiration behind the platform?
So my business partner and I, so Neely Lyons, she's my business partner. She lives in Mississippi. She works as a consultant for families who struggle with substance use disorder, some member of the family, right? But these family members can afford six figures to bring somebody in, to tell them what to do, to get expert resources, to get people, to get specific referrals. They do it all.
Is she a family law attorney?
She's not a family law attorney. She's an attorney by trade.
Gotcha.
She was also, I think, the youngest state senator ever elected in Mississippi.
Oh, she's a former state senator.
Yes, yeah.
That's pretty impressive. Right. I did not know that about her background.
Yeah, she's really incredible and quite accomplished. And her work with addiction started with advocacy. She was really creating and writing policy for people, especially I think she worked a lot with physicians who were in some type of intervention program where physicians had gotten...
Like what we would call here the Physicians Recovery Network.
Exactly. She worked, I think she was legal counsel. I'm going to get it so incredibly wrong, but I know that this is part of her work. She's done a ton of advocacy and a ton of policy making and really supporting groups on specifically professional groups, on how they can navigate substance use disorder within themselves.
So she's largely like an advisor.
Yeah, she did that. And then she has walked through her own personal journey, which she's very open about, of addiction and codependency, and is in recovery from both. And she now works with families in that coaching, consulting role with other members of their team who are therapists and different people, to get families into family recovery. So it's not just the one person who is in it, but it's the family. So that's, from her perspective, kind of what the work that she's done. And then mine was, I'm more on the individual treatment side. So I come from a background of working in a treatment center. I was a clinical director for a treatment center for several years. I work a lot with individuals with substance use disorder at various stages. I've certainly obviously treated them in early recovery, and I have people in my practice now that are in long-term sustainable recovery. And I've worked with family members and friends all across the board in the same capacity. And then I have gone through and walked this walk as a loved one, as a family member, as a friend. I have multiple people in my life who struggled with substance use disorder and also other addictions. And it was really this kind of interesting evolution. When I got involved in working with treatment, I really didn't want to, right? It was kind of the last place I saw myself working. But when I eventually did, I felt like my whole life kind of made a lot of sense. Like I happened to work in a center for all women. And the women there were working on the same building blocks of life that I had been working on for so long, learning about myself, learning about relationships. And that was really where I could lean into the work and really work with them on all kinds of holistic issues. So I will answer your questions. It's a very long and roundabout way of how Family Recovery Collective came to be. But I went through a loved one's addiction more recently. Since I had been a clinical director, my doctorate my study was on families and addiction, and including the family and the barriers to including family, specifically in addiction recovery. And I had all this knowledge. I had tremendous knowledge, in what I had learned so far. I had tremendous connections. Part of my study, I got to interview 20 different clinical directors from 20 different treatment centers across the country. Several of my close friends work in addiction treatment. And still, when I walked through it with my loved one, there were things that I didn't know. There were things that I had to pick up the phone and call somebody and say, how would you navigate this? Or this is what, the therapist is recommending. This is what the treatment center is recommending. Or how do I do this? And I thought in that moment, if this is hard for me to figure out, right? At this point, I've been a clinical director. I've been a therapist at a treatment center for many, many years. I've worked in addiction recovery for many years. I studied it with my doctorate. I know a ton of people. How is it still hard, right? And when I get irked by something, really irked by it, I kind of can't not do something about it. And so we like to say, when someone you love has an addiction or develops an addiction, there's no one hands you a manual on what to do, but we wanted to come as close as humanly possible to creating that manual. We wanted to really give, the knowledge that Neil and I have both learned over the years. We wanted to give access to the connections to the people that we have. We wanted to be a place where people could say, I'm not sure what to do. And we could say, great, here's what you do. Here's how you get educated. Here's information. Here's support, where you can connect with each other and with us. We really wanted to make this particular issue accessible to people, and not just be something that they may get if their loved one happens to go to treatment, which the vast majority of Americans who have addiction, whether it's chemical or a process addiction, don't go to treatment, right? So if you think about the family and the friends, that being the main place where they're connected, what are family and friends supposed to do when their loved one is unable or unwilling to go? We really wanted to solve that, or partially, be a resolution to that problem.
I feel like that's in keeping with the modern conceptualization of addiction interventions, because those processes are a lot more process driven now,
Right.
and a lot more inclusive of family over the long haul, versus what it used to be was you kind of create this surprise party where you gather everybody in a room and everybody reads a letter about their experience of the person abusing substances, and hopefully off they go to treatment. Now it's more of this evolved process of getting everyone together, working with them and prepping them for maybe a long period of time, and then continuing to provide advice and engage them in the treatment process while their loved one is being treated.
Absolutely. And I think that, when I went in and I was doing my study, my capstone study for my doctorate, I was really gung-ho, and I was like, I'm going to show that, treatment centers need to do a better job of including the family. And I was a treatment center. I was, in the early stages of my doctorate, still representing a treatment center. And what I came out of that study recognizing was treatment centers have so much on their plates and so little time and little resources to actually get family involvement in a really meaningful, sustainable, long-term way.
So that is a very generous interpretation of what's going on.
Right.
My experience of that, if I'm being direct, is this. You kind of get what you pay for. So if you're using your insurance and it's a network program, it means that these treatment centers are going to be reimbursed at the lowest possible rate that Aetna, United, or whoever is going to reimburse them. And so they're operating in a very lean way, which means the therapist that's assigned to the patient is going to have the maximum allowable caseload. So they're going to be responsible for managing the clinical and treatment experience of 15 patients in the facility at various phases of their recovery journey. And when you think about the needs of people who are getting sober, newly sober, just out of medical detox and trying to get their footing in early recovery, the needs of those individuals are pretty daunting in terms of how fragile they can be, and that a lot of them are going to be in crisis. So this is what you're spending all your time doing as a therapist. So family involvement is generally relegated to brief updates and that kind of thing. And that's what the majority of people's treatment experiences are. That's what most people have availability to. I worked for Karen Renaissance for a period of time, and at that time it was all private pay, but the family was assigned a family therapist who worked with them separate and apart from the work of their loved one. And I could say that that was relatively effective in terms of helping sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? To shepherd the family members through their own recovery journey. But that's an expensive undertaking. That's not something that everyone can just afford. And so what is the public offering of that? Well, that would be like Al-Anon support groups.
Absolutely.
That's what's free.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you're talking about a non-professional support group that's available to everybody. So if you have these very nuanced questions like you described, and these very serious issues to resolve, which will affect the kind of support that you're giving your loved one. Is this a tough love situation? Is this a situation where support is necessary? How do I experience their complaints? What do I do for them? What do I not do for them? It's a myriad of very complicated questions. And you're relegated to either finding a professional on your own.
Right.
Who
and
can help
paying
you,
for that.
and
Yep.
paying for that, how to navigate this, or going to a peer-led support group,
Right.
where these questions may or may not be answered.
Absolutely. And, I think, and I love 12-step, I love Al-Anon, but it is not psychoeducation. There is no one there that's going to tell you this is what addiction is. This is what's happening in your loved one's brain. This is why it's difficult for them to change. this is what's happening in your brain. This is what trauma is. This is what codependency is. No one is giving you that kind of information, in community support. There are some community support agencies that are groups, that are out there that do a little more directed skill building, like SMART does. I'm about to interview someone from Celebrate Recovery. I think they have a curriculum, whereas traditional 12-step does not necessarily. They work the steps. And so there's some things out there in terms of community support. But what I found, and what Neely and I have both found, is that it's incredibly lacking when it comes to psychoeducation. And that's definitely a void we wanted to fill, for sure.
I feel like psychoeducation around that issue is paramount.
Yes.
Because a lot of what you learn will be very much counterintuitive.
1,000%.
To what we know about supporting loved ones. I remember reading a quote in the Caron Renaissance Treatment Center clinical guide that they give to patients and families. And the language they use specifically is that addiction exploits the natural parenting instincts. And I thought to myself, that is so well articulated, really such a well articulated statement to conceptualize this idea that you become familiar with when you work with the population, that these emotional hooks, another term that they use, is just part of addiction manipulation. And ultimately, you can convince a parent that the help that they're paying for is actually hurting you, or that your needs aren't being met, or that you're in some kind of jeopardy, all of these different things that really
get confusing
and evoke anxiety on the part of the family to where they feel as though they're compelled to take action. And the actions that they might take in impulse to relieve their own anxiety.
Maybe enabling.
Yeah, enabling and really lead down the roads of sabotaging and just all kinds of disruption.
Right.
And this is with the best possible intentions, right? These are the most loving people.
Yes.
Who are being manipulated into these actions of pulling people out of treatment or giving their loved ones money at an inopportune time. So it really is a wilderness of horrors that has to be navigated.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you have a loved one, like a family member or friend, showing up and trying to do what they think is the most loving thing, oftentimes it can be the most enabling thing. And so there's so much work that needs to go into helping people with their own discomfort, their own anxiety, their own fears around setting healthy boundaries and what that actually means.
I was previewing the platform. I loved what you guys did. I thought it was very well constructed and intuitively navigable.
Thank you.
Because in one section, you have all of the expert interviews. So there's a lot of different topics that you can listen to a lot of different providers discuss. All of the nuanced things that we're talking about, you can listen in on an advanced lecture on any of those.
Yes.
On top of that, you have opportunities to interact with peers, people who are going through similar circumstances. So you have that supportive idea of being able to talk to people with shared experience. They have some interactions with you and Neely. They have live events to attend. I was looking at that and I was thinking to myself, this is very well constructed and very user-friendly. And you could see how someone could really get a lot of needs met through this system without having to take a crapshoot at going to different meetings that may or may not be for them, or throwing a lot of money at various providers. I mean, I think what you guys are offering is pretty cool and useful.
Thank you. And we are very intentional about being as objective as we can. We don't promote any particular treatment center or treatment provider, any particular way to get sober. We don't promote any particular way to get well. What we want to do is give people the information that outlines and highlights what those ways are. and allow them to choose for themselves or for their family what they think is going to be the fit for them. Like, for example, when I said I'm just going to interview someone from Celebrate Recovery next week. So we're doing a series of interviews on community support groups. So we've done 12-step, we've done SMART. Now we're going to do Celebrate Recovery. We're hoping to have someone in there from Dharma Recovery, just to show people here's different ways that these community support groups work. These are their philosophies. This is what you can expect when you go, so that they can have an initial sort of understanding like, oh, this might be my avenue, and kind of, have like a little bit of a head start on understanding what might work for them.
I think all of that is great
Mm-hmm.
because the vast majority of people haven't even heard of Al-Anon,
right?
Which is the one that's been around the longest.
Yep.
So SMART recovery, which I think used to be called rational recovery, or there's some relationship there where it's really a kind of cognitive-based, skills-based program that doesn't have any kind of spiritual or religious overtone to it, versus Dharma recovery, which is based in kind of Buddhist
Mm-hmm.
teachings and detachment. And and Celebrate Recovery, which is largely Christian-based.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all of these different avenues, depending upon where you're at culturally, might be a better fit for the way you conceptualize this behavior.
Exactly.
And none of these things are wrong.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Or one's not necessarily better than the other. It's really more of a question of which is going to be better for you. And I don't think people generally know about these things. I mean, this is institutional knowledge that you and I have because we work with this population of people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so, that's a huge, obviously, value of, our personal value and how we're carrying out our mission is we want to be objective. We want to say like, hey, here's a therapy you can try. Here's a different therapy you can try. This is what to look for in a treatment center. We have, I think, like an 8-page guide of things to look for and look at when you're deciding on a loved one's treatment. Here's different types of interventions. This is from interventions that are a specific style to interventions that you can do yourself by buying a book, right? Like we want to give them our knowledge, from doing this for so many years and say like, this is what we know, here it is. And hopefully you can find something in there that applies to you and that makes sense to you so that you feel like you're armed with a little more information and knowledge going into this than most of us were,
Full disclosure, people, this is not an infomercial for Family Recovery Collective. I'm asking all of these questions and we're talking about it because I think it's cool. That's really it.
But we appreciate it. We appreciate that. Yeah.
All right. So other things I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
So this is a thing that is debated often among lay people, folks in recovery. It's a term that's actually overused. In your experience, the word codependency, what does it actually mean?
So in my experience and the way I experience it myself and like to explain it to people is that I'm managing my own anxiety and discomfort by managing others. If someone else is okay, then I'm okay. And if they're not okay, then I'm not okay. And that was really, something that I think took hold of me a little bit from a very young age. I can remember, I think that I can remember the moment I sort of became codependent, which is probably a rarity. But I was young. I think I was about 4 years old, and my parents were fighting, and they were on their way to getting a divorce. And I'm one of 4 siblings, but all 4 of us are within 5 years apart. So we're very close in age and kind of grew up on top of each other. And I remember this particular moment that all my siblings were crying. And I had the thought, someone needs to hold it together, right? And so at that young age, I guess I decided that was going to be me. And so I stopped crying and I started trying to soothe and trying to fix. And I got really good at reading people's emotions,
Can we come back to something?
Yeah.
That's a lot of heavy lifting for a 4-year-old.
Right. I know. I think I was a weird kid in a lot of ways, right? Or just like, I think that I I didn't like to experience emotions, and I didn't necessarily have, my parents were dealing with a lot at the time. So this isn't about like blame or anything like that. But I think I didn't necessarily have someone that was attuned to me and really going in like after information or wanting to talk about that stuff. And a feeling in me that felt like I need to be small. I need to be as small as possible, have as minimal needs as possible.
Don't add to the burdens.
Yeah.
Don't
I'm
be
going
a
to sink the
problem.
ship. Yeah. Big time.
Don't be a problem.
And don't let your younger siblings do it either. So then I think I was caretaking them.
I'm glad, and thank you for sharing all of that, because that really is an inside look at the family of origin dynamics that kind of breed that type of thinking into people, because it's very innocuous and very much normalized. And everything that you're doing there has an intention of altruism, right? You're looking after your siblings, you're looking after your mom. And what's probably lost there that you end up in therapy and kind of go back and look at is that you have internalized all of this responsibility for the well-being of other people that then gets replicated in relationships later when someone develops like a substance use disorder or some other maladaptive behavior, and where part of the symptomatology is that they have difficulty accepting responsibility for themselves. So you see it, all the stuff comes up, and now you're taking responsibility and managing these people.
Well, what's so interesting about, and I would say that's codependent behavior, right? Those are codependent traits that I was starting to exhibit. And when you say like this lack of personal responsibility for a self, I also had that because I had no connection to myself, to what I needed, right? And so it was this really interesting, weird, and it kind of sounds so strange to say it that way, but this is what I've learned over obviously years of my own therapy, my own work, is that I was abdicating responsibility for myself too. From the outside, I looked, like you said, incredibly altruistic, incredibly caring, incredibly capable. And from society's perspective, I was probably who you would want as a kid. Right? I was probably who you would want as a daughter or like as a friend. And people would say, oh, there's no story here of how I blew up my life in some really catastrophic way. But there's a story about how I continued on that path and basically had no actual clue what was going on inside of me, what I needed, how to be in reciprocal relationships.
So that's interesting, right? And what I'm curious about does that result in some form of self-neglect? Because everything is so externalized that my sense of well-being is primarily driven around the motivation to do for other people. What do you end up missing as a result of that?
I think I didn't even know that I didn't have a relationship with myself, right? I didn't even know that I was missing it. I just thought this is what you do in life. And I believed that I was a good person, right? I'm like, oh, I'm such a good person. Look at me doing all these things. And
well, selfless.
Yeah. Right.
Selfless. And selfless is, that is equivocal to a good person.
Right.
One who does for others without concern for themselves, a selfless individual.
And I bet you money that someone listening to this podcast knows a selfless person who they either can't stand or they are looking at like, this person, there's something about them that drives me insane, right? Like they're so hard to be around, or there's something that's going on there. Like I was such a people pleaser. I was so good at anticipating and interpreting other people's needs, and I would start to do things for them. And so I think I was an easy friend to have, right? I never was the voice of dissent. I never was the one who was like, I don't want to see that movie. I would sit and listen to my friends' problems ad nauseum. I still love that. That's, I think, what got me to be a therapist, but it never necessarily needed to be about me, and in fact, it was uncomfortable if it was. And so it was so many years of just operating that way and not understanding that that was ultimately really unhealthy.
So at what point does it all come together for you that this is actually maladaptive and that there's something missing that you really want to correct and enjoy a more rich life for yourself, that something in your internal world is not right? Because externally, and probably from a lot of people's perspective, we could look at you as a high achiever, doing well, all these relationships. I'm sure everybody in your orbit would say nice things about you. So at what point do you start to feel a little empty, like you have to do something about this?
So what I think the early signs of what happened for me was I definitely think I have some obsessional thinking. Whether or not you put that on the OCD spectrum, somewhere on the OCD spectrum, I would put it. And I work with an OCD therapist and have, we talk about obsessional thoughts and that kind of thing. I saw that kick off early on that happened with the unexpected death of a classmate when I was 16, right? And so, which looking back now makes me really kind of say, oh, of course it did, right? Because I had no capacity to feel my own emotions, understand my own emotions, experience them, deal with them in some ways. And so I was handed this incredibly deep, hard emotional experience. And because I couldn't anticipate needs and, that kind of thing, I saw his parents for the first time, my classmates' parents, and I could not hold in a sob. I was so overwhelmed emotionally. And I remember this noise escapes from me as we're all standing there, we're trying to support his parents. And I remember one of my classmates that gave me kind of a dirty look, what are you doing? Hold us together. We're here for his mom and dad.
That is ironic that criticism was ever leveled at you, given who you'd been your whole life up to that point.
Right. Well, and we were kids. We were 16 years old dealing with death, and nobody knew what they were doing, So I'm sure he just had a reaction himself, shut up, or, something. I don't think it was just so instantaneous though. But I remember it. And I remember after that, I had probably a 2 to 3 year sort of obsession. And, we use obsession in the zeitgeist is oh, I'm so obsessed with this new lipstick, or I'm so obsessed with something. But an obsessional thought is typically an unwanted thought. And so I would have just so many intrusive obsessional thoughts about death, people around me dying, fears of just someone was 5 minutes late, they're dead. That still happens in my brain, by the way. I'll just picture the most catastrophic thing. But it was really, really tough for those first few years.
I think there's a cultural phenomenon around that. I think we are primarily a death-denying culture. And when you think about all of the priorities that are laid out for children during the ages where we are socialized and the different things that we're taught along the way, the question always kind of comes up, who is responsible for teaching children about death?
Right.
And I don't think it's really anybody that does that. I think that job gets deferred because nobody really wants to do it, because we act as though we're going to live forever. And there's all this obsession, like you said, about health and medicine and all of that. So,
or belief that we can control it.
Belief that we can control it and that we can live forever. I don't know if anybody listening to this, if this is going to come as a surprise to you, but yeah, we're all going to die
right.
at some point.
Right.
It's just, as I'm fond of saying, the McRib, we're all here for a limited time.
Right.
So,
like the McRib.
Like the McRib. We're all here for a limited time only. So, as a kid who is navigating a complex emotional landscape because you're very much focused on the feelings and emotions of other people to the neglect of your own, now there is the element of death. And for the first time, you don't know what to do.
Right. It was this huge emotional experience that I had no blueprint for. And in those few years of that obsessional thinking, I still didn't do anything about it. I didn't talk to people about that. I just kind of, I think, thought, I guess this is how my brain works.
Well, the interesting thing about that is, I think that would have been very counterintuitive to you, because if you're externally focused and you're more concerned with the needs of other people, then why would you ever think to burden somebody else with some problem that you were having? That probably just wouldn't seem like a correct thing to do. I imagine if you had a friend that had obsessive thoughts about death, then that would be much more easy to navigate, because then you could attend to them.
Right. But it was sort of like an extension of my hypervigilance. So where it was like, oh, you're depressed, you're bored, you're sad. Now it's like, oh my God, you could possibly die. Like, this is bad, And so it felt in some ways just like that. Like I was just, oh, here's a thing that I didn't know I needed to worry about that now I know. And so it's just a worry,
Worrying about mortality and people
Yeah.
around you dying.
Yeah.
I have to imagine once that all kind of came together and you already have the codependent tendencies, now what's the level of concern around illnesses and sicknesses around the people that you love?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. My siblings doing dumb things. Like, you went out with who and did what? And I would be like lecturing them and trying to get them to be responsible, and, because I was so worried
about all this mortality
all of it.
anxiety.
Yeah, for sure. And it wasn't until, I wouldn't get help until I was in my early 30s, which is actually when I went to grad school. And I still did not think that I had any problems that needed therapy. But they encourage you to do your own work when you go to therapy school. And a lot of the people who were in my program had gone to therapy, and they were talking about it and really normalized it. And I hadn't been around anybody that had gone to therapy before that, And I had, and so I just started seeing a therapist and started to really, understand myself a little bit more, understand my story that I was living in, and deal with, I still wasn't dealing with the feelings and the emotional experience, but it was at least something where I was centering myself and just saying, I'm struggling here. Like, here's what's going on, type of thing, I had an incident, I think a couple years prior to that, where a close friend of mine had killed himself. And I had such an identification with him. Like, he and I were, we had, one time we were in the Peace Corp together. And so this was like you have a lot of time in the Peace Corp, right? And so we were sitting there, we're having like this 8-hour conversation. And he said, do you think we're a lot alike? And I said, I don't think I've ever met anybody more like me than you are. And he was a year behind me in service. And so I was home, I had just moved to Florida, and I got the news that he had killed himself. And I had been the type of person that was like, I would tell my mom, I was like, I want you to know that, like, if anyone ever says that I would hurt myself, like, you will know that did not happen, because I would never do that, right? To start it, when that happened and when he died, I started to question, would I do that? Like, we're so similar and we're so close. And the grief felt like a black box sitting on my heart. It just felt like this heavy thing. And again, like, this was in my late 20s. I wasn't somebody who dealt with emotions, right? And so then it started to feel like scary. It started to feel like I just want to like hit something so hard that this box of like grief moves off of my heart. And I was like, is that what he felt? And I would just, I would go into like so much spin and depression. And that was a time too where I was working for the Salvation Army in Fort Lauderdale, and I was doing disaster relief for them. I was their volunteer coordinator. And I don't know if you remember, this would have been, when would this have been? Early 2000s. When did I move here? 03. So been like 04, 05, where we had like those back-to-back hurricanes. Like every 2 weeks, it was like another hurricane.
I remember that
Yeah.
year. That was rough.
And so, yeah, I was like, so we had our hurricane shutters up. I was living in darkness. I was eating M&Ms for dinner. I was just like there was no self-management at all in what I was doing. And like that happened. And I just really, like, it was a tough time. But again, didn't get any help then, like.
Well, I think that speaks to
Mhm.
the self-neglect.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that's a very sad story about your friend.
Thank you.
I'm sorry to hear
I don't mean
that.
to be so dark. I'm not like, I don't know why I'm telling you all this, but it's kind of how I came to be, I guess.
Well, it's actually an incredibly interesting story. And I think it's continuing because I'm asking questions because I do find it all super compelling and interesting. And you have a way of articulating it that is really easy to follow and to connect, that I believe if anyone was listening to that and they had any shades of this, they are probably able to equate or recognize in you some of the origins of their own issue. Like, you articulate it really well. So I'm a little mesmerized, honestly, just listening to it all, because it's a fascinating story. And it's really sad to hear about your friend in the Peace Corps. And at the same time, sort of, my response to you mentioning that you went to the Peace Corps, it's like, well, of course you did.
Of course I did, right.
That would almost seem like requisite for someone of your life.
Right. Like,
So
that tracks.
Yeah, definitely a Peace Corps. And then from there to the Salvation Army. Like,
right.
Look at you, just always serving the people.
Right.
Look at you.
Yeah, I know.
So let me ask you this, because you had mentioned about the Peace Corps before, which I think is fascinating. And I wanted to ask you about, and this seems like the appropriate time to make that segue. How did that happen? And where were you and what'd you do there?
And we were talking a little bit about this pre-interview of just like when things sort of naturally happen or you're moved in a direction and something like that. When I was in undergrad, I majored in political science and I got a work study job. So I worked for the university for like 10 hours a week, and I worked for the Department of International Studies, right? And so it was all of these master's programs, these students with their masters, and they were either foreign nationals, so people from all different countries, or they were returned Peace Corps volunteers who were coming back, because it was all development type of majors. And the Peace Corps volunteers were some of the, how can I put this, like most eccentric people. Like, they'd come in and they were always super nice, but they'd be like wearing a red pants and a pink striped sweater. And I would think, at 20 years old, like, who thought that was a good idea, right?
Well, that's really confusing to me, because I don't think you can really rock that look in Senegal. You know what I mean?
Oh, you can. Like, that's the funny part. Like, when I finally went to Peace Corps, I got it, right? Because like we would throw parties and they all had themes. And when I say throw parties, I mean, it would take us, I lived in Mali, West Africa. It is, I think the land size of Texas and California combined. So it's a huge country. And we were spread all over the place. And like transportation was, you might take a bus from the capital, like 13 hours to get to your site. If you were in one of the sites up north.
So this is in Mali.
In Mali.
Like you said before, West Africa,
right.
Landlocked by the Sahara Desert.
Yeah. So like the top 2/3 of the country were the Sahara Desert. And so we would put it out like, oh, we're going to have a party in this region, because we had 5 different regions in Mali, and volunteers in all 5 regions. And then we had what we call the stage house, which was like our group house, like at the center of each region. And
I mean, the first question that comes to mind is so stupid, but I can't help it.
Mm-hmm.
Who caters this?
Right.
Where do you find good catering in Mali?
Well, you'd be surprised. Like, it is the birthplace of innovation. You know what I mean? And so we're like, okay, let's throw a party. And like, what does that look like? And whether it's we're getting together for Thanksgiving or we're having a theme party, but we would go and we called it, so their term for white people was tubob.
Two bob?
Two bob, yeah. And it was
Is that a plural term?
No, I think it's an individual term.
So one two bob and two bobs?
Two bobs, yeah.
Gotcha.
Right? And so it was their word for doctor. I think French doctors were the earliest white people that they saw when they were colonized by France. And so they called them two bobs. And so they called us two bobs. So the majority of us were white, although we had some volunteers of color, certainly. But so they would always be like, two bob, two babu. And like, you would just wave. And when we went shopping, so they would have these like markets where they would have all kinds of shirts and clothing and all these things that were literally like thrift store rejects from the States, right? Like that Big Bird sweater your aunt knitted you in like the 3rd grade, it's there. Like Berkeley High School class of 1972, chess champion.
I danced my ass off at Alyssa's Sweet 16.
Exactly. It's there, right?
It's amazing.
And so our word for shopping then, we would always say like, let's go dead two bobbing, because that's in Amalian's term, like they wear clothes until they literally fall off and then they become a rag that they use around their house. And so they thought like, who would send us clothes that are perfectly fine? These must be from people who've died. Thus the dead two bobs, right? So these are dead white people's clothes. And so we would always like call it dead two bobbing. So we would go dead two bobbing to try to find the best outfit for any theme party we were having. It was a trip. But you talked about food. We did Thanksgiving one year in like one of the remote villages. Mali's 98% Muslim, but there's like a little Christian part where a couple of volunteers were stationed. So we went there for Thanksgiving one year, and there were probably like 30 of us. And you can't get turkeys in Mali, or like you could, but it was weird. You had to get 2, and then somebody tried to get them and they had to like ride on the back of a moto, like holding these turkeys, right? And like getting there. So the planned turkey like didn't work. So
let me ask you this.
Yeah.
I'm ignorant to like the wildlife there.
Uh-huh.
I mean, are turkeys indigenous to Mali? Is that something
there
that lives there?
A wild turkey somewhere, but it's probably pretty rare. So our plan B was guinea fowl. And so we're talking to one of the locals and they're like, okay, we're going to wait till the guinea fowl run by and we're going to trap them in the yard. And I was like, this is our Thanksgiving plan. Like, but that's what we did. Like,
so you're now a hunter gatherer?
Yes, right.
In your Big Bird sweater, you're doing this?
Exactly.
It's amazing.
Exactly. I know. And it was like in those moments that I got it. I was like, oh, those Peace Corps volunteers who came back, who I met when I was
Have you ever killed and eaten an animal? Have you ever done that before?
Well, not by hand, but I've definitely eaten some really interesting things. And I've definitely seen animals killed, like when they're, usually sheep, like, and that kind of stuff. I remember once I was on a bus and I'm looking out and they're about to kill this sheep. And I thought, I need to be able to face this. Like, I eat meat, like I should watch this. And then like I couldn't. And I was like, okay, that's it. Like, I need to be a vegetarian. And like,
are you actually a vegetarian?
No, it was like 4 hours later as I was biting into my meat sandwich. I was like, I forgot I was going to do that. It didn't take.
That's a very short commitment you had there.
You can see, yes. It was not, it was, yeah. It came and it went.
You were a vegan for like 4 hours.
4 hours. I was solidly entrenched in it, and then I forgot. Yeah. Yeah. But all kinds of crazy stuff happen in the Peace Corps. And
what were you guys there to do primarily? Like, what was the service? I have to imagine water wells.
So there was water sanitation. There was small business enterprise, that's the type of volunteer I was. There was health.
So wait a minute. So you were helping develop economically? Yes,
which is literally insane, right?
Well, what kind of industry is happening there? Like what are the services that people are building businesses around?
So it would be like Mohammed with the Coke stand, and you'd be like, "Hey, why don't you sell some peanuts with that Coke?" And he'd be like, "Okay, good idea." And you're like, "My work here is done." Like really basic stuff that we would go in and start to work with. I mean, I worked prior to going to Peace Corps. I had my first job out of college. I worked for.
So it's almost kind of like you're working in the because that's a form of economy, right? Like that's how goods and services are exchanged.
Mm-hmm.
So you're helping people who are maybe in these bazaars
Mhm.
or have these stands
Mhm.
evolve. Like you're probably introducing them to the idea of profit margins and things like this.
So you would think that I had a lot of business experience going into this. I didn't, right? I worked for an insurance company for 3 years. I was doing customer service type stuff. And so I say, like, when I went as a business volunteer, it's kind of just like, wow, how did I get there, right? They teach you and train you. A lot of us worked for village banks. They call them a KES. And we would work.
What's the setup of a village bank in
Yeah.
Mali? What's it called?
A KES.
A KES.
Like CAISSE.
I don't even know anything about the economy there. Is it
Right.
gold standard? Is the money backed by gold? Do they even have their own currency there?
They do have their own currency, CFA, CFA, and we call it CFA.
Is it backed by gold or dollars or what?
That's a very good question.
All right, sorry.
And
I didn't
definitely
mean to
beyond
get into
my
I'm just curious about these things.
Yeah. So we would work with them on learning about loans, microcredit. So people wanting to borrow $200 to be able to buy a cow that they could then use for milk, or, stuff like that.
Oh, cool. So these local banks
Mhm.
would do these small loans
Mhm.
to help these local businesses.
Right.
And you would help them navigate
Understand what it was, the responsibilities, educate people in the communities
about like how interest works
and how credit works, and
that's really cool. I mean, that's economic development.
Right. It was interesting. Like the hard part about Mali was that there was no infrastructure, and the really fun part about Mali was that there was no infrastructure.
Right.
So, like, for example, we had when you would walk down the street in Ségou, I lived in the second largest city. But when I say city, I really mean that term in the sense there were still dirt roads. There wasn't electricity everywhere. Like it was, it was still primitive in a lot of ways. And if they saw somebody that looked like a tourist walking down the road, you would have 10 people come up to you and say, I'm a tour guide. Let me take you across the river, and show you things. And people would pay them and they would do it. But and it wasn't nefarious. People weren't trying to rob you necessarily or anything like that. But they also weren't tour guides, right? So they didn't have a way back across the river, let's say, or, it was a little bit tricky.
That could be really inconvenient.
Yeah, right. So we worked with them on certification. Like, what would it mean to create a certification where you guys would have a standard amongst yourselves that then you could give to the couple local hotels and say, we're certified tour guides. This is what that means.
Like I have a bus or something that will take people around and I can get them back here.
Or that I've sat and done some education around this or created education around it. One of the most fun and fulfilling things we did was teach. We got some out-of-use computers donated by USAID to the local library. And a colleague and another volunteer and I taught typing to about 5 teenagers. And because we got the computers and we're like, oh, we'll teach them how to use Word. We'll teach them how to use Excel.
And people are speaking English?
No, this was all in French.
French?
Yeah.
Do you speak French?
Yeah. I mean, definitely conversationally, and haven't done it in a while, but yes. And so we would, we asked them, what do you want to learn? And they were like, how do you type without looking? And so it was literally channeling your high school typing class. We'd be like, okay, close your eyes and put your hands on the home row. And we taught them to type, And what was really fascinating, and we only had five kids, but the girls picked it up and retained it. And so the next class, they were building off what they already knew. And the boys went right back down to 0. They were back on home row. The girls by the end were just going to town, typing everything, not looking at anything. The guys were like, okay, where's the L,
Is there anything surprising about that to you?
Well, it made me think our brains might be built differently, and how things lend itself to certain, again, it was an N of 5. So I don't really think you can make a scientific study off of it, but it was just fascinating to see.
So you were there for 2 years.
Yes. I was there for 2 years.
It sounds like an amazing experience.
It was.
Of course, capped by the fact that a person that you were very tight with ultimately committed suicide.
Right.
And That sounds like a really tragic life event for you.
Yeah, it was. It was huge. And my first real experience with understanding depression, because I felt like, again, it shifted me into that kind of, I'm like, is this what he felt like, or is this what it was?
It was very identifiable because you had gone your whole life feeling that something was missing and that there was something different about you. And finally, you get to this place where you identify with somebody. We are alike in some way. And then ultimately, he is a person who dies by suicide. I guess the question is inescapable. Mm-hmm. What does this say about me?
What does this say about me? And I wouldn't say that I felt like something was missing. I don't think I knew.
Oh, I apologize.
No, that's okay.
That was an assumption.
No, but I just want to clarify that because I really didn't have, when I say like I wasn't in touch with myself emotionally in so many ways, like I didn't have a sense that I was doing anything out of an adaptive, unhealthy, unhelpful way of being. I just was being, this is just how my brain worked, but absolutely, I think that was like point 2 of obsessional thinking. When Zach died was like, oh my God, like would I do that? And then that fear and that, being almost scared of myself a little bit for a little while. But again, I didn't ever go to therapy until a few years later because I, quote unquote, should because of grad school,
Right. Again, another rule following adventure.
Right. Exactly. And certainly not because I had any problems. Right. So it was, it was good. And it was really insightful and would kick off, I think, the last 18 years or so of that work off and on and in different ways.
Gotcha. So now the journey becomes real, self-discovery. Things look a little different. There's more of an ability to look internally at yourself, to understand yourself in a different way. I believe that there are 2 types of therapists, the kind that have done their own work and the kind that haven't. And it's really not difficult to distinguish one from the other, especially if you've done it for a minute. So this kind of takes you into your own work, probably some self-discovery around the codependency. You're working in addictions. You're probably seeing it play out all over the place. I wanted to ask you a different question. It's a little bit of a crude segue, but so you are trained in psychodrama, and I feel like, in my understanding, you're doing it at one of the highest levels because you do psychodrama at a place called On-Site Workshops that's in Tennessee. In our industry, it is a very well-known, kind of prestigious place where people who have complex issues go to attend these experiential retreats, do these intensive therapies. I have referred clients to this place. I've been hearing about it for years. I have friends who were trained there. I have other friends who attended just for their own self-growth and as a place to do their own work. It's always kind of been one of those bucket list things to maybe go there and do something for myself. Hasn't happened yet. So you're involved with that and you do psychodrama there. So I have a couple questions for you about that. To start with, can you explain what psychodrama is?
Yeah, so I do psychodrama and other experiential methods. But psychodrama was created by J.L. Moreno, and it basically is what's called an action method. There's something very different about like you sitting there in a therapy session and telling me about your relationship with your mother versus you standing there in a room with someone stepping in as your mother and you talking to her.
So the idea of you're creating like an avatar of another group member, like a peer, who's stepping in to support you by acting as your mom. So instead of talking about your mom, you're actually talking to an avatar of your mom. So you're able to kind of recreate a more proximal emotional experience of that.
Yeah. So you've got this stand-in, right? But not only are you talking to like your mom, let's say, but you have also created a scene. You've also like said, okay, my mom and I have, a really tough dynamic and we're always fighting. And we, the facilitator might say, oh, okay, tell us about like that, one of the biggest memories of that or the earliest memory of that you can think of that was just really impactful. And they'll say, well, we were in the kitchen once the night before my wedding, and this is what was going on. And so we'll literally set that scene.
So, for example, just based on our conversation today, we might go ahead and reenact talking to the other siblings who would likely be other group members, and you could just reenact all of that as your current self, trying to access the emotions and feelings of your 8-year-old self.
Absolutely. And the other piece of it is we do this thing called reversing roles, right? And so in essence, the person who we call it the protagonist, so the person who is doing the work, you'll stand in obviously for yourself, but then you may say something like, why did you do that, Mom? And we would have you reverse roles. And so you would stand then in the place of your mother. And the other person would go into your place and repeat the line. Why did you do that, Mom? And then you're having to put yourself in the experience of your mother and answer.
So you're sort of switching conscious experience to the best recollection or understanding that you have of who your mom was and what motivated her and how she would genuinely respond to that question, which is an extension of your own consciousness.
Right, totally. And you can do it. There's a number of ways you can do it. You can do it where you're just playing it out and just being in her energy and what she would normally say. You can do it from her deeper level of consciousness, where you're trying to get to the underlying part of her that, is what she's really trying to say or what's really going on for her. There's many different ways to do it, but it just depends on what the client needs at the moment and what the goal of the work is for that moment.
Super fascinating.
So fascinating.
And really a very nuanced therapeutic perspective. Now we're into like super niche specialty, right? So here's the other question I have for you about that. I know that psychodrama has historically been used as a treatment modality for people with codependency. It's pretty high on the list. So do you understand codependency really well? You understand psychodrama really well. You're doing it at the highest levels. All right, explain to me how the psychodrama is utilized in treating the codependency.
So it's used in treating so many things, right? And we can set up, there's all kinds of things that we'll do in psychodrama and other experiential methods where it's just looking at your life and your experience through a different vantage point and different lenses, or getting to act it out in a different way. Feeling in your body what it's like to set a boundary. Like let's say for me, there might be a situation where if I was the protagonist and someone is doing psychodrama on me, they might have someone step in for my 8-year-old, right? And then I'm watching this 8-year-old run around and try to fix everybody's problems. What does that look like now from my vantage point as a 50-year-old? Like
that must be incredibly emotionally provocative.
Yes, which is so ironic, right? Because remember where I've started, which was completely disconnected from emotion.
So I'm assuming that you're training in psychodrama, which I also know to be a very intensive commitment. It's not something you learn in a weekend.
No.
It's a thing that you do over the course of some years. Mm-hmm. And it involves you doing a lot of your own work.
Yes.
So everything you're acting out with other people, mm-hmm. you've also acted out in your own life.
Many times. Yeah.
So coming from where you've come from, where you were pretty detached emotionally from these experiences, to now where you have this insight and this ability to emotionally connect to all of this stuff,
right,
and acting it out, mm-hmm. and reliving it. Mm-hmm. What was that like?
Well, it's really, when I say like I started formal therapy 18 years ago or 19 years ago now, like it has been a process. This isn't something that I was like, oh, I went to therapy for a year and now I can do this, right? And I can feel and I can cry. I did not cry in my life, I want to say, for 20 years. I couldn't cry. I got to the point where I was so good at shutting down my emotions. I could feel like a tear well up, but I could not, even if I wanted to, like make it fall from my eye. I was so emotionally like shut down and used to containing it. And so
constricted in a way.
Yeah, incredibly.
So that the range of emotions that were allowable was narrowed. And sometimes we refer to that as somewhat constricted.
Right, hugely. And so what is often the case, and would certainly happen to me, I had a lot of somatic complaints. I'd get headaches, I'd get backaches, I would have stomach aches, like things that happened
who's the author of the book Body Keeps the Score?
Oh, Bessel van der Kolk.
Right. So in the vein of van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score, which has become very much in vogue as late, there is kind of a conversion of unexpressed emotion for people who grow up with trauma, experience trauma, but have the constricted, affected expression of it, where these things become kind of converted into the body and will often be expressed physical ailment, what we might call like a hypochondriac or a conversion disorder, somewhere in that, or just a very somatic individual who expresses all the stresses physically. So what was going on with you? Do you mind my asking?
No, go for it. Yeah. So remember, like I started to obsess about death and then and then it would be about my health and like, oh my God, something's wrong. And so, and particularly when I worked in hospital systems where I would see people who were otherwise healthy get something horrible, right? It would set off that obsessional thinking. And then I would be like, oh my gosh, I have unexplained dizziness. And I would spend time, money, whatever, going to different doctors, getting different tests done to eventually learn I was fine.
So you became a little bit of a hypochondriac.
Yeah, big time.
Sort of exaggerated symptoms and preoccupation, obsession. So you're worrying that everything that's kind of like a nuanced or sort of unexplained sensation was something you were going to chase. And so you were going to chase these things down and get answers because you say, I'm probably dying. So that can lead people down a really terrible road of these constant series of tests and blood work and all of these different scans. And if you do enough of them, there's going to be some irregularities and abnormalities that pop up. And I feel like this is the bane of existence of every neurotic older client that I have that's just in and out of the doctors, because the more you look into yourself, the more you find, even though it may not be a pursuable thing. And then what happens is people end up on a lot of medications.
Yeah, totally. It was really interesting to kind of watch, because again, at this point, when I worked in hospitals, I wasn't as aware. I didn't have the insight to call this like something on the OCD spectrum or obsessional thinking. I just thought it was how my brain worked.
Well, it's not classically OCD. It's not like you were locking windows or obsessively washing your hands or having these counting rituals. It's not classically OCD. It's just a preoccupation and obsessive thoughts around a particular theme. And you can easily overlook that.
Right. Well, and what I did, the compulsion piece, if you will, was going to all the doctors. And also what I've learned about OCD, I'm trained in exposure and response prevention, which is what you use to treat OCD. And I see a therapist, again, who specializes, is rumination can be the compulsion. Just me trying to like problem solve through worry, through like, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, maybe I should go here, maybe I should do that, maybe I should do this thing. Like, that's what I'd be doing. I'd be Googling, I'd be researching the heck out of like dizziness or like, other things. I would just kind of, I would get into like a fear space and start to roll.
So the rumination becomes the compulsion. So you don't have to be out there washing your hands or counting things. Just the time that your mind is going over it and spending time on it, that is the compulsive activity meant to reduce your own anxiety. If I think about this over and over and over again, and I'm paying attention to it and in hypervigilance over it, in some ways I can reduce my anxiety because at least I'm convincing myself that I'm doing
something. Right.
This is being taken care of.
Yeah. And again, I didn't know. It sounds so like, of course, like, how could you not know? I didn't know that this was problematic in the way that I should be seeking help.
Well, it's interesting too, because said differently, one could just say that, hey, you're just a physically responsible individual who is practicing good self-care, and when something's wrong, you're seeking help for it, and you're just trying to stay healthy.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So said differently, in our culture, with our obsession about medicine and medical procedures and where we advertise pharmaceuticals on TV,
Right.
one could look at you as just being a really responsible adult.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I super fortunately, I think, I think I read a book a long time ago called Ultra Prevention, which talked so much about pharmaceuticals and how you get on one and it starts to create a problem somewhere else and you end up on all these things. And the real problem is that you're on too many medications. So I have a very, I think, healthy fear. I don't even say fear, but like reservation of getting on a lot of medications. So I didn't go down that path, but I certainly went down every testing path like crazy, trying to make sure I was okay. And it wasn't until after I left work in the hospitals where it kind of calmed down that I was like, oh, that probably wasn't quite normal,
You take a person who has some OCD tendencies and you stick them in a hospital. It's just a recipe for disaster.
Right. Well, anything can be a recipe for disaster, what I've learned, because I used to say like I have such a suggestible personality. I think it's a little bit of OCD. I think it's like you say something and I'm like, oh my God, I didn't even think about worrying about that. But now I probably should, right? Because like...
Well, now I know what I'm going to do this weekend.
Exactly. I think it was Tina Fey in her book that said hypervigilance is my superpower. And I was like, Tina, like that's me, right? Like we're simpatico.
Well, some people would just say you have really good instincts.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, when you've looked at like the 100 different possibilities that can happen in any scenario, like it's not instincts, it's just preparation and over preparation. Yeah. But what I've realized more recently is, in my work, and it has been more recently, like that I've really understood my codependent tendencies, my wanting to fix, my wanting to make sure the people I love are okay, not wanting them to suffer, and really starting to understand like, oh, that's anxious thinking. That's anxiety happening in my brain. And what I'm trying, so if someone calls me and let's say this is somebody who's in recovery and someone in my life and they're like, oh, I'm having a really bad day today. Like I'm really anxious. My brain will go to, shit, are they going to relapse? Are they going to hurt themselves? I will go to the worst case scenarios, right? And then I will start to do things like, what can I do? Have you talked to your therapist? Have you called the psychiatrist? Maybe you need a different you know what I mean? I'll start to try to manage. I'll start to play small and be like, well, we don't need to go hang out tonight. Take care of yourself. Like, we don't need to go out. Let's just stay in and we'll watch a movie or something and keep it simple, right? They're not asking me to do any of that. I just decide that they probably don't want to go out and be in a crowded theater or a restaurant. And so I will start to, again, play small. I'll be like, well, I'm not going to tell them about my day because I don't want to overwhelm them. I go back into those patterns. And that's how it showed up in my life as an adult, of like, I like to joke that I'm so good at one-sided relationships that I have them for a living.
Ah, that's funny.
Right. If someone says that's funny, then it might not be funny. But like, what I'm saying?
It's funny.
But like...
people aren't watching us, so I have to fill in some of the visual context.
But it's like...
Because if like you just chuckle, that's not coming up on an audio podcast. So I didn't want to leave you hanging like you made this joke and then there's crickets in the background. It was funny. That was legitimately funny.
Thank you. Are you caretaking me right now?
Probably. I mean, I brought you to my office to do this interview. I
feel like
you feel responsible. I feel like just being a good host.
This is like rocking in my shoes. This is what, my life is like. So yeah, that's how I found it showing up, is I would just try to caretake, play small, do the same things I was doing, when I was young. And, but then also struggling in those relationships, not feeling seen, getting frustrated.
So it's like you end up making all these sacrifices for the well-being of others, things that they didn't really ask you to do.
Exactly.
And then being resentful on the back end that this is starting to become, as you say, a little one-sided.
Right. And that's where when I say, like, I also wasn't taking responsibility for myself.
That's a really good kind of metaphoric look at the codependent relationships because there's a lot of what we call covert contracts. So the covert contract is, if I'm attentive to you when you tell me you're not feeling well, and I'm willing to change our plans or accommodate you in this way that you didn't ask to be accommodated, then in my mind, I have some expectation about how I'm going to be treated. It'll never be stated, it'll never be expressed until you actually fail. Yeah, until you fail to meet the debt, at which point now I'm going to be angry, and I'm either going to internalize that and become a passive aggressive maniac, or I'm going to blow up on you at some improportional time where it's going to seem like a really strange overreaction.
Yeah, and we're going to be stuck in a dance somehow. And I think that I didn't fully see my part in the dance for a very long time. I didn't see that I was doing those things.
This is all of it. This is really the language and lifestyles and complexities of a codependent person. It's invaluable to hear you expressing it, because as a astute therapist, kind of really reflecting on your own experience in this and the healing journey of it, you're really able to articulate it as an individual and as a professional evaluating the behavior of an individual. Hence, you can always tell the difference between a therapist who has done their own work and one who hasn't, because this is a really astute understanding of one's own process, but one that is relatable to others. So I appreciate you making that available.
Absolutely.
And then we come back to the Family Recovery Collective, where, there's this whole forum where all of this material is clearly articulated, not just by you, but a whole bunch of other people. So full circle into that, this is the inspiration internally for making this information available to others. That's really, really cool.
Thank you.
I like all of it.
Awesome. No, I really appreciate that, because I think codependency and having codependent behaviors or traits, or however you identify, is so nuanced and so covert a lot of the times that we don't really know what it is or why. You know what I mean? We get into these patterns and these dances, and like we're just doing things, but again, thinking that what I'm doing is loving.
Course. It's a problem when a word enters like the common lexicon,
right?
And it becomes overused and it loses its definition. So people talk about codependency without really understanding all of the things that we're talking about, and often have a misunderstanding of what it is, but a belief that they actually understand it, because it's a term that's been utilized frequently around them, so we can understand it on some basic level.
Absolutely. And I want to say, for me, and of course, I've done trauma work over the years, obviously, doing, all kinds of things. But currently, the way that I manage my anxiety is working with my codependency is managing my anxiety. So it's really working with a therapist that helps me understand my anxiety, understand my anxious thoughts, and manage them, instead of trying to manage them by managing my relationships, in an unhelpful way. So that's been a game changer for sure. And I really love, exposure and response prevention, which is, again, an anxiety treatment and OCD treatment. It has flipped the way that I work with anxiety with my clients. Like, I used to look at it through a trauma lens, which was like, let's calm the body down, like your body's sensing danger where there isn't any, or disproportionately sensing danger. But ERP is more about leaning in and allowing yourself to experience the anxiety without shutting it down, and building up your capacity for it in that way.
How does this help individuals who have issues with rumination? I'm asking for
that's exactly it. So it's looking at the first phase is kind of externalizing, so for example, I keep like a log when I'm having these thoughts, and I'm like, okay.
So there's writing involved?
Well, I just keep it on my phone. So if anyone out there ever steals my phone, you're going to get a lot more than you bargained for. But I keep it in the notes app, and I just write down like, what's my rabbit hole thinking? Like all of a sudden I'll just find myself in a place where I've just created, like I'm driving down the street and 5 minutes goes by and I'm in a whole story in my head about something catastrophic happening. And now I can kind of catch it and chuckle and be like, oh, hello, friend. There's my anxious part. And so I'll write down like, what's the catastrophic thought?
So ultimately, with all of the work that you've done, there's the written piece about what's the anxious thought and recognizing that this is all of a sequence. But it's also like a shadow piece of recognizing that your anxious thinking is actually a friend. It's actually someone with whom you have a relationship.
Yeah.
So did you ever see the documentary? I think it was either on Netflix. I think it was on Netflix, and it's called Stutz. And it was with Jonah Hill.
Yes, and his therapist.
He documented some of the work that he did with his therapist. And they talked about this shadow work that they were doing with these tools that Stutz had created. And I actually got the book and read it. I was so... Because when I'm watching this video, and here's Jonah Hill, and he's bringing out his therapist, and I'm thinking to myself, this is some real self-indulgent Hollywood shit we're going to be exposed to, and I don't really care. Like, you should have just kept this quiet. But I'm going to check it out. And I was really pleasantly surprised. And I was thinking to myself, there is an element of genuine altruism happening here, where they're just making information available to people because these tools and this guy's perspective is really cool. So he talks about the disowned parts of people, the shadow work. Mm-hmm. And Jonah Hill talks about his experience as being an obese little kid. And they make like a pop-up of it, like a big cutout, like a life-size cutout of him as like an overweight adolescent. And they point to it and they say, this is sort of superimposed over you at all times, but it's sort of separate from you. And what you got to do, you don't want to take this and disown it completely and lock it up in a closet. Because what happens if you take someone with unmet needs and you lock them in a closet? They're going to cry and complain and all of that. So you're going to be hearing from them a lot more than you want to if you ignore them. So what you have to do is learn how to make friends with this piece of you. So I say all that to say that when you said, oh, there you are, there's the anxious part that's making up a whole catastrophic story, that you actually treat that disowned piece like a friend.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of the Stutz shadow work.
Well, that's also very internal family systems, right? And so what Stutz calls the shadow self in IFS would be the exile, and IFS, the theory goes that all parts have a positive intention, right? There are manager parts, there are firefighter parts. Those manager parts are the ones that are trying to prevent the exiles. They're trying to prevent the pain from coming up to the surface. They're day-to-day operators. They work really hard. They can be perfectionism. They can be hypervigilance. They can be all kinds of things. And then you got these firefighter parts, because the manager parts aren't 100% effective. And so when something comes to the surface, like let's say I have an uncomfortable thought about my family, my loved one being sick. And I'm like, oh no. And then I don't want to feel that in my body. And so my manager part might be like, let me call them every day and make sure they're okay. And that's what I'm doing. My firefighter part means like, if they actually get sick or something happens, then it might be like, okay, now I'm going to fly there. I'm going to see the doctor. I'm going to manage the whole situation, and like those firefighter parts can be also really extreme, but it's a very like 2-second, kind of thing, but IFS is very similar, but it's looking at your parts as almost a separate consciousness, like that operates outside of you, that is trying to help. It's trying to manage your situation. That little 4-year-old, a part was born, and that part was like, I'm going to hold it together. The part that had no needs, the part that could, help other people or fix, quote unquote, other people. But that's a very young part of me. And so if that part hops into my driver's seat right now at 50 years old, I'm letting my 4-year-old drive my bus. When my 50-year-old wise self, who's been through a lot of life, has a lot of understanding of things, has done a lot of work, I should be the one driving. So it's just that acknowledgement and that recognition of like, oh, like that little kid got scared from something in my world and is trying to manage the way that she knew how to manage, but it's not the way that I need to manage now.
It's really cool to hear all of this because, again, we're talking about these therapeutic modalities that you're practicing with others, but ultimately there's a self-management and practicing on oneself. And I think that there's a level of conviction around that is sort of unmistakable when you're working with people, that this is an individual who has been through their own issues and has done all of the work that you're asking your clients to do. And I think that is convincing in a way that relationally probably makes you a lot more trustworthy.
The learning, when I got my MSW, my uncle said, you're going to learn here, and he pointed to his head, and you're also going to learn here, and he pointed to his heart. And he said, this is all about like you understanding things, but also understanding yourself. And I think that this, I keep saying 18-year journey, 19-year journey, whatever it's been, has been both of those things, and like they inform each other. My professional life certainly informs my personal life. My personal life certainly informs my professional work. And I absolutely believe in it. And, that's why I will nerd out on therapy all day long. and I'm super passionate about giving other people the same tools that have helped me find freedom and find self-connection and understand how I work and be able to actually experience my emotions now. I can cry.
Good for you.
Thank you.
You didn't know what you were missing out on all this time, and now you get to do it whenever you want.
All the time. Yeah.
So if someone was interested in wanting to work with you or find out more about your practice or the Family Recovery Collective, what's the best way to find out about the therapeutic offerings of Dr. Erin McNamee?
So you can find my practice at McNameeTherapy.com, and then Family Recovery Collective is FamilyRecoveryCollective.com. And we're also on all the social medias, with the exception of TikTok, which we're maybe hoping to do, but we're Gen Xers trying to figure out TikTok. So there's that. But yeah, like reach out. Those are the easiest ways. The contact information, emails, all that stuff's on there. And yeah, but I so appreciate you having me and giving me the opportunity and the space to just kind of share my story and what I do with my story. And, it's always fun to connect to other therapists and hear some of your story too, although we didn't cover that in this episode.
Well, I appreciate you coming and taking the time from your very busy schedule, all the different things you're doing to come and share this material. And, I hope people check it out. There's a lot of very useful and fascinating information in there. So thank you again for coming and spending some time with me this afternoon.
Thanks, Eric. It has honestly been a huge privilege.